So there's a story that dates back to the time of the Buddha. A woman named Kisa Gotami, who grew up in very difficult circumstances. She was quite poor and had a very hard upbringing. And at some point got married, and then, as was customary, moved in with her husband's family. And this family was very abusive to her, and she continued to have an incredibly rough time. But then, at some point, she had a child with this man, a young boy. And this child was the light of her life, just absolutely lit her up. And unfortunately, this child died. And she was devastated. She lifted the body of her child up in her arms and walked into the streets wailing, yelling, asking if anyone could please give her medicine for her child. And of course, people would look at her like she was crazy. Finally, one kindly gentleman approached her and said, "If there's anyone that can help you, it's going to be the Buddha." So she was inspired, and she went in search of the Buddha, clutching her child. And she found him teaching to a group of monastics and broke through the lines and wailed out, yelling, "Please, Buddha, help me, give me the medicine I need." And the Buddha took one look at her and said, "I will give you the medicine you need. And what I need from you is to bring me a mustard seed. And this mustard seed must come from a family that has not known death." She was perked up. She rushed back to the village and went to her neighbor, knocked on their door. An old man opened the door. She said, "Please, could I borrow a mustard seed?" And he said, "Of course." And he went to get it, and she goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to ask. No one here in your family has died, have they?" And he said, "Actually, my wife of many years just passed away the other month." And she said, "I'm so sorry." And went on to the next household, knocked on their door. A young woman opened the door, and she said, "Please, could I borrow a mustard seed? And by the way, no one here has died in your family, have they?" And the young woman called her siblings close to her and put her arms around them and said, "Actually, our mother died just last year, and we're still all very much in mourning." And Kisa said, "I'm so sorry," and went on to the next household and knocked on their door, and on it goes. And throughout the entire village, she couldn't find another family that had not known death. And at that point, she realized that the medicine the Buddha was trying to teach her was this realization that she is not alone. She buried her child and held a funeral service, and then actually went to study with the Buddha and practiced with him for many years, and is said to have been of great comfort to all of these beings that would seek his help who had lost someone. I mention this story because when we are heartbroken, we often feel incredibly isolated and alone. We think we are the only person going through this particular emotional roller coaster. How else could anyone know the pain that we're feeling? But when I have traveled and talked about this topic and told this story and asked a group of people, hundreds of people at a time, please close your eyes, and if you feel heartbreak right now, either on a personal level, in a relationship with someone, or even the societal heartbreak opening the news every day. If you feel heartbreak recently, raise your hand. And when people open their eyes, they discover that nearly every single hand is raised. We are not as alone as we might think when we are heartbroken. I should define what I mean by heartbreak. At this point, I've written an entire book on it. It's called Love Hurts, Buddhist Advice for the Heartbroken. It actually sort of reads as a choose your own adventure Because the word heartbreak is sort of an umbrella term for so many things. When we say, I love the word heartbreak, I hate feeling it, but I love the word because it physically feels like our heart is breaking. But what we're really meaning is that we feel all of these other things. We feel betrayed, and we feel angry, and we feel like a failure, and we feel depressed, and we feel sad, and these are different things. And these are all very normal things to feel, but we don't actually feel normal about it. Nothing quite feels right when we're heartbroken. So the personal definition I use is a little bit different than some of the definitions you might be familiar with. References to heartbreak date back to the time of the Bible. Became more popular, a term in the 16th century, apparently. If you go on dictionary.com now, they say it's great sorrow, grief, or anguish is the definition. But I think that's a little surface level. So I'll share my definition, my personal one. My definition of heartbreak is the great pain that we feel when our expectations are not met in some way. A facet of reality as a human being. There's a way I got to this definition, and I'll come to it in a second. But I wanted to first just share a little bit about my own personal journey with heartbreak. And I think like many of us, I was exposed to heartbreak very young. I had grandparents that died young, animals that had died young that I loved. But it was only in this spring to summer of 2012 that I would say that I got somewhere near the term I used earlier, which was devastated. And it was this 3-month period when the bottom really just dropped out on everything. There was, it started with this woman who I was supposed to marry, realizing that her life plans were different than we had originally planned together. And very spontaneously, for both of us, breaking off the engagement and handing me the ring. And that was shocking to me. So this is an example of an expectation of, oh, I'm going to spend the rest of my life in this relationship with this person. The pain is, that's not happening. That's not reality. So I was faced with the real reality, which is heartbreak. And then there was the job loss that followed very closely thereafter. I was laid off and my entire department was eliminated from the place I was working. And that was a real sting to the ego, and of course, also the bank account. I didn't know how I was going to pay rent, and it was very heartbreaking to go through this process with this community that I had trusted and grown to love for my work. And I had the expectation, oh, I'll be able to support myself, and that was no longer there, and that was painful. But the straw that really broke the camel's back was July 13th of 2012, when my best friend from college, at the age of 29, died unexpectedly from heart failure, which is essentially what they say. This is different than a heart attack. It's heart failure. This is what they say when someone's heart just stops beating. There's no cause, there's no reason, there's no logic. They just die. And I was devastated. There's no better word in this case than that. I don't know if we have a term for when you stop meditating for a period of time. I would maybe like fall off the cushion or something like that. But I fell off the cushion. I wasn't practicing. I couldn't bring myself to practice. I couldn't barely bring myself to get out of bed. I was doing all the things that we know that we shouldn't do when we're heartbroken. I was drinking too much. I was like binge watching television and not connecting with anyone. I was isolating myself. I wasn't taking care of myself. I wasn't eating well. I wasn't sleeping well. I wasn't seeing anyone. I wasn't practicing. None of it. And even though I wasn't taking good care of myself, I had this great group of friends that were taking care of me. And they got me to the point where I began working with a therapist, and that work got me to the point where I began practicing again. And that work, particularly dealing with strong emotions on the cushion, got me to the point that I realized I needed to take care of myself. And I started exercising again and sleeping better and eating normally and cutting down on some of the destructive things that come up when we're heartbroken. So I can sit here and talk to you today, and I'm not talking from that place, however many years now later, of open wounds. I'm talking to you from scars, meaning that I still carry this pain with me. It's not that it just poof went away. It's part of me, but it's not like it was before. And for those of us that are heartbroken, I think this is some of the extremely good news of our really strong, vitriolic, and painful emotions. That as the Buddha taught, and has been the case before that and even to this day, everything is impermanent, and that includes our heartbreak. That includes the strong emotion you may be feeling right now. When I set out to write a book on heartbreak, my mother reached out to me and was like, is this what we get because so-and-so broke up with you all those years ago? And in some extent, yes, I just mentioned it. And in some extent, no. Once I had gone through that process, I started just seeing how heartbreak is so all-pervasive. And it's not just a romantic thing. It can be the loss of a friend, the loss of a pet, any number of reasons that we might be heartbroken. It inspired me to do my book in a very particular and weird way that I do not recommend for anyone who is not interested in writing their books in completely bizarre and weird ways that may or may not work out. There's this store in New York City where I live called ABC Carpet and Home. And it takes up this entire city block. They very generously hosted me as an author in residence, meaning that I would write from their storefront window every afternoon for a little over a week. And it sounded good in theory, but it ended up being a little bit more like I was a monkey at a zoo, where, you know, I would be trying to write and people would knock on the window and be like, what are you doing in there? I'd be like, I'm trying to write this book. So I don't necessarily recommend that part, but the first part of the day was spent in conversation one-on-one with complete strangers. I would meet with people, and they gave me some office space to do it, where they would come in, and having practiced in the morning, I was holding this space, and they would sit down in front of me, and they would ask me 4 questions. Or sorry, I would ask them 4 questions, and just give them some space to tell their story. I'll come back to these 4 questions in just a minute. But these people meeting with me for what we called the heartbreak appointments is what gave the fuel for the book itself. And it was such a beautiful and wonderful thing to be able to bear witness to all of the different types of heartbreak. Even the people who came to meet with me often thought, oh, I'm going to sit down and tell you the story of my ex-boyfriend. But when they sat down, and I'll give away the first question, and I would ask them, what is your experience of heartbreak? The thing that would come up was completely different. I write about this in the book, all of these different forms of heartbreak. But, for example, my cat died. And I know it's just a cat. People would say that. But it's still really, totally heartbreaking for me. And that's so valid and wonderful. They would say, I gave my child up for adoption and I don't know what happened to them all of these years ago. They would say, my grandmother died a week before my wedding. And that's heartbreaking. They would say, I look exactly like that victim of police brutality who died in the back of that van. I look exactly like her. They would say, I'm worried that when I die and I meet God, He will say I didn't live up to my highest potential. All of these things, and this is how I got to my definition, to come full circle on that. Such a wide variety of experiences, but they all had, I have this expectation either of myself, of my relationship, of society, and it's not being met, and that is so painful. The woman who said, my grandmother died a week before my wedding, it's not necessarily that her grandmother died. We expect to some degree that the people who are a generation, 2 generations older than us might die before we do. It was the fact that it was a week before the wedding. And the expectations were, I have a spot reserved for her. I know exactly where she's sitting at the wedding and at the reception. I know what she's going to be drinking. We have a drink made specially for her. I know who she'll be seated next to, and I have an idea of all these sassy things that she's going to say to all of my friends who finally get to meet her, and then poof, those stories aren't real anymore. And the reality that's there is heartbreak. Within the context of the book Love Hurts, I give a lot of different ways that we can work with this painful reality of these emotions that come up, essentially. All of the chapter headings are like, if you feel angry, if you feel like a failure, if you feel like you can't eat something. And it's a weird thing to root against your own book, because to some extent, I wish that you didn't have to hear me talk about this because you're not feeling heartbroken. I wish that no one would have to buy a book about heartbreak because they're okay. But unfortunately, it's doing well because so many of us are heartbroken right now. In this book, I even include this one story under the heading, If You Feel Like You Will Never Love Again, which in my mind is one of the worst ones, where we literally have the story of, I will never heal from this. I will never love again. And in that chapter, I say a story where I felt that way. And I called up my friend, Brett, and I said, I just need you to tell me. Tell me that I'm going to find someone and fall magically in love and it's all going to be okay. And he was very pragmatic and wise. And he said, I don't know if you're going to meet one person. I don't know if you're going to meet many people over the course of your life. And whether it will be romantic or something else. But I know that you will love. I know you, and I know you will love again. Below that story, I included my personal email address because I'm silly and didn't think that anyone would ever reach out. And I say, if you feel like that, put I will never love again in the subject line, put your phone number in the body of the email, and I will call you. Because sometimes we just need to hear it. So I would love to root against my own book, but if any indication is, in terms of how it's doing, I've been shocked by how many people do need to hear that. It's gotten to the point where I receive that email every single day. So one, if you feel that way, please know that you are not alone. That you can knock on the door of all of the households and know that people have felt heartbreak. And two, I want to just look you in the eyes right now and just say, I believe that you will heal. I believe that the strong emotions you are feeling are impermanent, and they will change and they will morph, and it will take longer than you want it to. And you may not get over it one day magically, but you will heal. And you will love again. From a Buddhist point of view, love is innate to who we are. That's just part of us. It's our birthright. And no matter how much we armor up and try and protect our heart, frankly, it seems to burrow through that armor and shine forth once more. So you may need time to heal, and that makes sense, but I believe that you will love again. Here's an exercise that I think might be helpful based on these heartbreak appointments that I had. You might want to contemplate these questions in meditation. You might want to journal about these questions. You might want to just ask these questions aloud and see what answers come up and speak about them to yourself or even to someone else. The 4 questions I asked people. 1, what is your experience of heartbreak? Just getting the story out there, giving voice to it, not feeling like we have to hold it so tightly and so preciously, is actually quite liberating. Which brings me to 2. How are you feeling right now? Many of us go through our days, one meeting to the next, lots of activity, without ever knowing how we feel about anything. So pausing and just saying, having shared that story, how do I feel right now? When I met one-on-one with people, they would often say, just actually being heard and being in a space like this, I feel lighter. I feel like something shifted. I'm not holding it so intensely. These strong, difficult emotions might actually be more ephemeral and amorphous than I thought. 3. What do you do to take care of yourself in the midst of heartbreak? Number one answer that came out from absolutely every person right off the bat when I asked that, I'll tell you the thing I do that I know I shouldn't do. That was always the first response. I know I shouldn't, but I reach for a bottle and I drink something. I know I shouldn't, but I go look for someone to hook up with. I know I shouldn't, but I grab a big box of cookies, eat the whole thing. All of these sort of negative or destructive patterns that we might have inkling to go do, they say, I know I shouldn't, and maybe I won't now, just even naming it. And then they would get to the part of, here's the things I could do or I sometimes do to take care of myself when I feel heartbroken. And I included the entire list in this book, Love Hurts. But there are things like going to the park with my dog, playing with a small child, napping a lot, reading a beautiful book, writing poetry, going to a yoga class, taking a long walk with friends, any number of things that we can do that don't seem like a big thing, but it's a way that we actually nourish and take care of ourselves while we go through a really intense grieving process. Those things are very important. And the fourth question I would ask, and I'm going to ask you right now, what is one thing you can do to take care of yourself today? Just in this moment, committing to one thing that you can do to hold yourself in good health while you go through this very difficult time. So let's just take a moment together to just acknowledge one thing that we can do silently to ourselves and make that commitment. Thank you. I wish you only the best as you go through this intense period of time of heartbreak, whether it's heartbreak about something personal within you, people in your life, or just feeling generally distraught about our societal being right now. Please know that I'm there with you, feeling equally heartbroken, and I'm sending you love. Take care.